Welcome back to That Was the Women's Week That Was. This is a little bit different this time round. So a little bit of an explanation and a little bit of housekeeping. As you will know, Twitter has changed its name to X. And of course, things like tweets are now posts and so on. It's probably going to be the case that I'm going to accidentally keep using the Twitter nomenclature when it's switched over to X. We'll try and switch over and get it right, but bear with us in the meantime. The other thing is, you may well have noticed that, I hope you certainly noticed, that if you are following us on X, we've had a theme this week and we will continue to have a different theme each week through August. So this last week's has been the first of 5 themes, and the reviews that are dropping into your inbox will also reflect each of those themes. This week, the special theme has been medicine and the safety of women and children in healthcare. The hashtag is bad medicine. If you pop that hashtag into X, you will hopefully find all of our tweets, posts on that topic. In addition, when you look at our profile, you will see something called highlights. Tap on highlights and you will see a compilation of our main posts all about this theme from the week. And then we'll do the same next week and switch it out for another set of highlighted posts, and the following week, etc. You get the idea. Rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals are a shocking report. Thanks to the detective work of WRN members, we discovered that 6,500 rapes and sexual assaults in hospitals were reported to police between January 2019 and October 2022. Our report highlighted the inexcusable failure in our hospitals, where we are at our most vulnerable. The figures are shocking and prove that NHS trusts are failing in their duty to protect both patients and staff. What is clear is that there appears to be ingrained inertia in dealing with this safeguarding and policing failure. These are the words of, and you can hear more from, Professor Jo Phoenix, who authored the report with the Women's Rights Network, and you can catch up with her interview with WRN on our podcast. In a safe space, horrific sexual violence is taking place. Why is this not being addressed? The staggering figures and shocking detail weren't enough to prompt an unequivocal response from the NHS. Their response was focused on reporting and not on prevention, and some media outlets didn't think that rapes in hospital were an important enough subject to report on at all. Yes, we're talking to you, BBC News, The Independent, and The Guardian. Our founder, Heather Binning, speaks for us all. Hospitals are not providing a secure and safe environment. So, our challenge to the NHS and the police: what are you now going to do? Breastbinding, the painful truth. How common is breastbinding, and what are the health risks? Initially in a blog on our website, and then in an extended post this week, we provide the evidence and find out how dangerous this practice really is. We're also going to cover it in detail for you here. This is an audio version of the blog Breastbinding, the Painful Truth. Breastbinding seems to be very common among young women who wish to identify as men. It's a process of strapping your chest in order to reduce the size of your breasts and to make yourself look more masculine. But how common exactly is breastbinding, and what are the health risks? There's plenty of advice to be found about binding, both from personal accounts on social media and from official websites supporting trans health. The commonest official advice is to wear a correctly sized commercial binder to avoid the use of DIY devices such as elastic bandages, duct tape or plastic wrap to remove binders when sleeping, and to limit binding to 8 hours per day. But these recommendations are based on individual personal experiences. What does the evidence tell us? Astonishingly, for something that seems so common and is promoted so widely by various health sites, there is very little proper medical research into the effects of breastbinding. The best research data we have is from America, from a study performed by university departments in Boston and Baltimore, called the Binding Health Project. This was an online survey of 1,800 chest-binding females and was conducted in 2014. Observations from the data obtained in this survey have been released as 3 separate papers in 2017, 2018 and 2021. This series of separate publications give the illusion that there have been multiple research projects, but in fact they all originate from responses to the same online questionnaire, the Binding Health Project. In addition, we have a much smaller online survey about binding and tucking, also performed in Baltimore, but this only had around 76 female, or FTM trans, respondents. In summary, in the Baltimore survey, 80% of the females, FTM trans, had bound their breasts and 62% were binding for more than the recommended 8 hours a day. The Binding Health Project discovered that most had started binding before the age of 21, a third before the age of 18, and the average time spent bound was 10 hours a day. In both studies, around half said they bound their breasts every day, and almost all of the young women surveyed reported some physical symptoms due to breastbinding, around 90%. Which girls or women were at risk? Unsurprisingly, the more hours they spent bound, the more likely the participants were to have symptoms, and the larger their breasts, the more symptoms they suffered. But, unexpectedly, commercial binders did not turn out to be better than the DIY versions. In fact, there were more problems reported from using commercial binders compared to DIY binding with bandages, tape, tight clothing or plastic wrappings. What problems did binding cause? The 2 surveys asked slightly different questions, but the commonest problems reported were pain, musculoskeletal and neurological symptoms, along with shortness of breath and lightheadedness. Most of the young women suffered physical symptoms from binding. From the smaller Baltimore study, the incidence of the commonest symptoms, 65% got back pain, 49% had shortness of breath, 32% reported bad posture, 30% developed chest pain, 30% complained of feeling lightheaded, which may well be down to the restricted breathing patterns. From the larger Binding Health Project study, the figures were even worse. 97% reported some sort of health problems, with 3/4 experiencing skin problems and or pain of some sort. 76% reported skin problems, 54% reported back pain, the same percentage for overheating, 49% reported chest pain, 47% reported shortness of breath, 45% had itching, and 3% reported rib fractures. Although most symptoms were obvious in the first year of binding, pain increased over the next few years, peaking at 5 years of binding, while some problems occurred later. Specifically, skin problems and rib fractures could occur some years into binding. Conclusions. The usual health advice given to breast-binding females is to limit binding to 8 hours a day and to use commercially available binders. This advice was either ignored, over half the women in both studies were binding for more than 8 hours, or was plain wrong, as commercial binders were associated with more symptoms, not fewer. Breastbinding carries significant health risks. While many symptoms appear minor in stature, such as backache and skin soreness, permanent discomfort is not a natural state for young women to be experiencing during their formative years. Shortness of breath, along with pain, might well interfere with ability to participate in sport and other healthy activities. Worryingly, pain symptoms do not subside within a few years but continue escalating. Some serious complications, such as rib fracture, also occurred later. The simple message to take home: if clothing has health guidance attached and recommendations to restrict the time it's worn, that should be a good indicator that it is not suitable for young people whose bodies are still developing. There is no safe limit. There is no safe method of breastbinding. Binding your chest is bad for your health and should not be encouraged. And from breastbinding to breast removal, I guess what? Companies like Costa Coffee and Penguin Books are encouraging and facilitating the mutilation of women's bodies, aided by those whose first principle is do no harm. We were all shocked by the vile image used to promote Costa Coffee, featuring a mutilated young woman's body. The BMJ published an article on breast ironing. It's called Breast Ironing, an under-recognised form of gender-based violence. Now, compare breast binding to breast ironing. Only one is viewed as child abuse by bodies like the Criminal Prosecution Service, the NSPCC and Childline in the UK. So why is breast binding not viewed as a form of abuse and mutilation too? And why are the likes of Costa Coffee and Penguin Books encouraging and facilitating the mutilation of women's breasts? This week we've also covered a medical scandal, puberty blockers and the mutilation of young people. Our powerful blog, The Next Big Medical Scandal, details notorious medical scandals from lobotomy to thalidomide right up to puberty blockers, and asks a question: when will we learn? Evidently we haven't learned, and children are being harmed as a result. Dr. Hilary Cass is undertaking an independent review of gender identity services for children and young people, and has been looking at the evidence. At this stage, the review is not able to provide advice on the use of hormone treatments due to gaps in the evidence base, she said in the summary of her interim report last year. Meanwhile, we have plenty of anecdotal evidence that puberty blockers have been used inappropriately and that children are being harmed as a result. For example, we have the shocking book published by the investigative journalist Hannah Barnes, Time to Think, which explores the rise and fall of the gender identity service for children at the Tavistock Clinic in London. In addition, we have the equally shocking testimony of the detransitioners, highlighted last week when 19-year-old Chloe Cole spoke about her experiences to Congress in the US. A story that brought tears to our eyes, and a story that appears to have piqued the hardened newspaper editor and TV presenter and journalist Andrew Neil. This is heartbreaking, it is barbaric. What have we become, he asked. Should GPs be able to prescribe hormones and refer patients for surgery without psychological assessment? Sadly, this ticking medical time bomb has been approved in Scotland's new treatment protocol, as revealed by CanSG, a clinical advisory network of concerned clinicians. History is full of examples of how medicine gets things terribly wrong. Why have we not learned the lessons? It is inexcusable that we have allowed this to happen to children and left them irreversibly damaged. Just a few days ago, an interim clinical policy Puberty suppressing hormones for children and adolescents who have gender incongruence/dysphoria was published by NHS England. There is now a public consultation running for 90 days from the 3rd of August to the 1st of November. There's a consultation guide and you are asked for your opinions. Please do complete the consultation. You will find it via our timeline on X, or you can go to engage.england.nhs.uk/consultation/puberty-suppressing-hormones. Please do complete this. We need to get the evidence out there as to how harmful puberty blockers are for children and adolescents. Also this week, we've highlighted safeguarding, intimate personal care and why it matters. You can read our blog, Safeguarding, Intimate Personal Care and Why It Matters, on our website. It was written by WRN member Mary Howden and is read here. I started my career in social care when I was 17. I worked in a care home for older people, and my first involvement in providing personal intimate care was assisting another care worker in the bathing of an 80-year-old man. I had never seen a man naked before, and in many ways it was a baptism by fire. I quickly learned that carrying out the most intimate personal care tasks requires confidence to get on with the task in a sensitive manner, but also that the view of any individual in that situation must be heard and they must be treated with dignity and respect. After all, when you've managed these tasks for yourself, how do you adapt to the fact that you need assistance having a bath or a wash? Your bottom wiped, your breasts lifted to dry underneath them, your incontinence pad changed, cleaning faeces and urine away or sanitary protection changed, having parts of your body touched that are very rarely seen, let alone touched by others. Maybe you can't give consent due to learning disability or dementia, or you just don't have capacity. You need others to understand what dignity and respect means for someone who cannot consent. Later in my career, I worked in learning and development. I assessed many staff across a range of organisations who provided a range of intimate personal care to older adults or children with physical and learning disabilities, either in their own home or residential care. When I had chemotherapy for breast cancer, I experienced firsthand the powerlessness you feel when you're dependent on others for your personal needs. And I've had to support a family member with bathing and toileting. I understand what is needed to deliver personal, intimate care from both a personal and professional basis. What is intimate care? It's any care which involves washing, touching or carrying out an invasive procedure that children or vulnerable adults are unable to carry out for themselves due to physical disability, additional support needs associated with learning disabilities, medical needs, or those arising from a child's or an adult's stage of development. Intimate care may involve help with drinking, eating, dressing, toileting, continence management, bathing, showering, applying creams and lotions or dressing. Help may also be needed with changing colostomy bags and other such equipment, and it might require the administration of invasive medication and therapy programs. Safeguards. Of course, safeguards exist, and all organisations have policies and procedures. Personal care and intimate support are provided against a set of national occupational standards. Individuals must have disclosure checks to make sure they don't have a criminal record that would bar them. In parts of the UK, staff must be registered with a regulatory body and undergo learning and continuous development. Organisations are inspected against a set of standards. The Equality Act 2010 provides an exemption to employ staff on the basis of sex. However, despite all these safeguards, we cannot ignore that abuse happens, particularly with those who are so vulnerable they do not have a voice. This is all set in the context of an understanding that sex matters, that those who need this kind of service will be explicitly asked if they consent to a male or a female carer if they're able to do so. That biology is immutable and you cannot change sex. However, here we are, with gender ideology sweeping our institutions and proclaiming that men can be women and women can be men. In Scotland, they're progressing full steam ahead to a world where you can self-identify as a man or a woman. Even our disclosure processes allow people who are transgender special dispensation. There's no requirement to give employers or regulatory bodies the information about their previous names and the information they need to ensure individuals are safe to work with vulnerable people. Where are the safeguards? How do we protect vulnerable children and adults, and especially those who can't consent? How do we give individuals a choice to say whether they want a man or a woman to provide care if we are not allowed to say with certainty who can provide that care? And if we complain, we're accused of being bigoted or transphobic. Surely, if you need help with the most intimate tasks you can ever imagine, you should be allowed a choice in who does that for you. Yet here we are, and we don't. Another of our must-read blogs that we've also covered on our X timeline is written from a patient's perspective and details an horrific stay in a psychiatric unit when she was 18 years old. The living hell of a mixed-sex psychiatric unit. I read it here. I was just 18 when I was admitted to a psychiatric unit. As I was 18, it meant I was in an adult unit. I was the youngest one there, and the younger ones were mostly women. But men outnumbered the women, and the men must have been 50-year-old plus. The unit had separate male and female dormitories. The waking day was spent in the mixed part of the unit, where the lounge, living room, dining room and therapy room were. I was the only one in a wheelchair, but there were women with learning disabilities and women who had had male-induced traumas. I was one of these women. I was admitted to the unit after struggling with an eating disorder, self-harm, obsessions, compulsions, and suicidal thoughts. These issues were compounded by PTSD triggered by male-induced sexual trauma. I was scared as soon as I set foot on the ward because I was surrounded by men. I'm in a wheelchair, so it's significantly harder to defend myself. I can't run away. I am defenceless. The men were 6 foot plus and stocky. They themselves were unwell and threatening. What went on every day will stay with me forever. What was going on daily was men would come up behind us and touch our necks, kiss our necks, touch our breasts and further below, attempt to kiss us on the mouth, and were generally in our personal space at every opportunity. That's what I experienced and what I saw happen to others, though it seemed to happen to me an awful lot. Maybe because I was an easy target. I can only dread what went on that I did not see. As the same-sex parts of the unit were only for sleeping, there was no escape in the daytime. It was a living hell. As someone with PTSD, I was already on guard, but this made it 10 times worse. At first, I complained to the staff about the attention I was receiving, along with a number of the other younger women. Our cries for help fell on deaf ears. When we complained to the staff, about 60-40 female-male split, we were told to stop attracting the men's attention, stop complaining, ignore the men. Or we were just completely ignored by the staff. If we attempted to defend ourselves against the men, We were punished, sometimes restrained. I was restrained a number of times. Due to my past, I often freak out when a man approaches me suddenly from behind and starts touching me. This includes both patients and staff. The staff knew of my past but didn't seem to think it was triggering and more detrimental to me to be put in these situations. After realising we weren't being taken seriously, the older women started to defend the younger women, including me, from some of those men who were the most abusive to the women. The fear of facing every day in the unit was unbearable. I was already traumatised before going in there, and every day I lived in there on the edge. I thought the unit was a place of safety, a place where I could be helped to start to recover. Instead, it was a place where I had become further traumatised. I was fortunate in that men and women were not mixed at night. Now, however, we know that men who identify as women are placed in women's dormitories overnight on psychiatric wards, thanks to Annex B. I do not think there should be mixing of sexes at any time of the day in psychiatric units. I came out of my experience a changed person. I no longer trust people in authority to keep me safe, and for a few years I was completely lost and engaged in the most risky behaviour. It could have ended very differently for me. Thankfully, I am mentally well the majority of the time. However, I feel extremely sad and concerned for the women in mixed-sex psychiatric units. Sex matters. My experience continues to haunt me. I want this madness to stop for women's safety and future mental health. We continue campaigning and asking questions. This last week, we've focused on health. Next week, our hashtag will be It's Criminal. You can find all of our blogs and other useful content on our website, womensrights.network. You'll find us on X at Women's Rights Net. Let us know what you think of our content, and if you want to get involved in any current and future campaigns, join us. You'll be very welcome. Remember, courage calls to courage everywhere.